Have you ever seen a picture of an aircraft carrier, especially one of the new giants like the USS Gerald R Ford? From certain angles, particularly head-on, it's this colossal, almost defiant shape rearing out of the water. It looks like an upside-down pyramid with a massive, flat city, an airport, really balanced precariously on top, bristling with multi-ton jets. It just looks like it should tip right over, doesn't it? So, how does this 100,000-ton marvel of engineering, this floating fortress, stay upright and not just topple into the sea? Are the thousands of sailors on board constantly playing a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek with an engineering disaster? To unravel this mystery, let's first tackle a slightly easier question. Why does a ship that weighs tens or even hundreds of thousands of tons even float in the first place? I mean, if you toss a hammer or a heavy wrench into the water, it's going straight to the bottom, no questions asked. But then, a simple rubber ball, even if you push it all the way under, will bob right back up, sometimes shooting out like a cork from a champagne bottle. What's pushing it out? That, my friends, is the magic of Archimedes' force, or buoyancy. It's a force equal to the weight of the water that an object displaces when it's submerged. So, if an object weighs more than the water it pushes aside in its own volume, it'll sink. If it weighs less, it'll float. Simply put, if the average density of the object is lower than the density of water, it's going to float. Now, you might be thinking, a steel aircraft carrier? Lower density than water? With all those airplanes, missiles, fuel, and everything else, and you'd be right to question it. But let's do some quick, mind-bending math. The total volume of a carrier, like the Gerald R Ford, right up to its top deck, is around 1.3 million cubic meters. Its maximum weight, fully loaded, is about 112 million kilograms. Divide that mass by its volume, and you get an average density of roughly 86 kilograms per cubic meter. For comparison, wood, depending on the type, has a density of around 550 kilograms per cubic meter. So, this steel behemoth, as a whole, is almost 10 times less dense than a block of wood. That's why it floats so high and proud out of the water. Okay, so it floats. But that doesn't explain why it doesn't just roll over. That's where things get even more clever. The Archimedes force, that upward push, is applied at a specific point called the center of buoyancy, essentially the center of the submerged part of the ship. Now, if the ship tilts, say in a wave, that center of buoyancy shifts to the side of the roll. Imagine a vertical line going up from this new center of buoyancy. Where that line intersects the ship's central vertical axis is a crucial point called the metacenter. Here's the golden rule. If the ship's overall center of gravity, the average point where all its weight is concentrated, lies below this metacenter, the ship is stable. The forces will naturally try to right it. If the center of gravity is above the metacenter, well, then you've got a recipe for capsizing. The greater the distance between that metacenter up high and the center of gravity down low, the more stable the ship is. It's like trying to balance a pencil on its tip versus on its eraser. You want that weight low, but don't think for a second that achieving this stability, especially in a warship as complex as an aircraft carrier, is a simple task. It's an incredibly intricate dance of design, requiring countless ingenious tricks from naval architects. And the proof that theory doesn't always perfectly align with practice. Well, history is littered with tragic shipwrecks caused by a loss of stability. Even in our modern era of supercomputers that can seemingly calculate a ship's every breath. Remember the South Korean ferry Seoul in 2014? It capsized, tragically claiming over 300 lives, mostly school children. The primary culprits: overloading the vessel and improper cargo placement. When the ferry made a sharp turn, it tilted, and that deadly combination led to a complete loss of stability. That's a grim reminder of how critical these calculations are. And it's not an isolated incident. Now imagine the chaos on an aircraft carrier's flight deck. It's home to a dynamic, shifting city of aircraft. The Gerald R. Ford, for instance, typically carries 40 to 44 F/A-18 Super Hornet fighters, 5 to 7 EA-18G Growler electronic warfare jets, a few E-2D Advanced Hawkeye early warning aircraft, C-2A Greyhound transport planes, and a half-dozen MH-60R Seahawk helicopters. These multi-ton machines are constantly taking off, landing, being moved by massive elevators between the hangar and the flight deck. Every single movement subtly, or not so subtly, affects the ship's stability. And then there's the fuel. Thousands of gallons of jet fuel are constantly being consumed. This fuel is stored deep down in the ship, in the most protected areas, which helps keep the center of gravity low. But as it's used up, the ship gets lighter at the bottom. And that center of gravity slowly creeps upwards, constantly trying to reduce the ship's stability. It's a never-ending balancing act. But naval architects and the US Navy don't just rely on calculations. They put these behemoths through some truly brutal, real-world tests. When a new aircraft carrier is accepted, it has to pass what are known as shock trials. This isn't a gentle shakedown. We're talking about detonating powerful explosive charges up to 40,000 pounds, or about 18 tons underwater, right near the ship. The goal: to simulate the violent conditions of combat, like underwater mines or torpedo hits, and to see how the ship and all its complex systems react to extreme vibrations and shock waves. Crucially, they need to know if such a blast could actually capsize the ship. The USS Gerald R. Ford endured these trials in 2021 and proved it could withstand such immense forces without critical damage. It was the first time in 34 years an aircraft carrier had undergone such a test. Then there are the maneuvering tests. Imagine this: 100,000-ton giant making sharp, high-speed turns, complex maneuvers designed to push its stability to the absolute limit. They need to see how the ship behaves during sudden changes in course and speed, how it affects navigation, and how the crew performs under that stress. Despite their colossal size, these carriers need to be agile enough to evade threats, like torpedoes or incoming missiles. Watching footage of the USS Gerald R. Ford heeling over, its flight deck tilting about 30 degrees as it carves a turn at 30 knots. That's 55 kilometers an hour, is breathtaking. Can you even imagine the colossal forces required to tilt 100,000 tons of steel that dramatically? So, how do they achieve such magnificent, almost defiant stability? It's a combination of brilliant design features. First, the special shape of the hull. It's meticulously designed to lower that all-important center of gravity as much as humanly possible, while simultaneously raising the center of buoyancy. That underwater bulb at the bow of the ship. It's not just there to look cool or solely to reduce water resistance, as many believe. It also plays a significant role in increasing stability. Equally crucial is the ballast system, a network of massive tanks within the ship. These can be filled with or emptied of seawater to precisely regulate the distribution of weight. This allows the carrier to maintain a stable position and perfect balance even as weight shifts on board when planes land or take off, or when tons of supplies and fuel are loaded or consumed. Ballasting also ensures the ship sits at the proper depth its draft and helps reduce rolling when making turns or battling heavy seas. These tanks are located along the sides and deep in the keel area, and the whole system can be controlled automatically or manually from the control room. Powerful pumps capable of moving thousands of liters per minute shift this water around, constantly fine-tuning the ship's balance. And if that wasn't enough, modern carriers like the Gerald R. Ford are equipped with active stabilizers. Think of these as giant, movable fins or blades under the waterline. They actively rotate and adjust based on the direction and strength of the waves, counteracting the ship's tendency to roll. This system, controlled by computers receiving constant data from gyroscopes about the hull's position, significantly reduces both side-to-side and front-to-back rocking, even in challenging sea conditions. Visuals, historical footage, photos of USS Bennington and USS Enterprise in storms. Narrator, bye. But even these incredibly complex systems can sometimes be overwhelmed by the raw power of nature. In December 1953, the aircraft carrier USS Bennington was caught in a severe storm in the Pacific. The ship experienced terrifying rolls and was battered by shock waves, resulting in damage to the deck, aircraft, and equipment. Some unsecured. Planes were simply washed overboard. 16 years later, in 1969, the USS Enterprise faced a similar ordeal in the same Pacific Ocean, suffering serious damage to aircraft and deck equipment due to strong rocking and wave impacts. So much for its name meaning peaceful. However, it seems America's newest generation of carriers is built even tougher. In 2022, during a training exercise, the USS Gerald R encountered an extreme sea roll, hitting a wave of significant height. The ship's structure withstood these immense loads, and remarkably, there was no damage to the aircraft on board. But we can't forget that an aircraft carrier is, at its heart, a warship. It's designed to face not just natural forces, but also enemy weapons. Before the advent of hypersonic missiles, American carriers were often considered nearly invulnerable. The cost to an enemy to even attempt to destroy one was deemed unacceptably high. For example, a successful attack might have required 50 to 60 Soviet strategic supersonic bombers, launching a barrage of P-500 Basalt or P-700 Granite cruise missiles. These were designed to overwhelm air defenses through sheer speed and numbers. Even then, Soviet losses were expected to be up to half the attacking force, and it would still take 20 to 30 direct hits to reliably sink a carrier unless nuclear warheads were involved, which changes the math dramatically. But with modern hypersonic weapons, like Russia's Zircon or China's YJ-21 and DF-17, the game has changed. Fewer missiles might be needed, and the probability of them punching through defenses is higher. So, how do carriers enhance their survivability now? First, there's a layered missile defense system, the Aegis Combat System on escorting cruisers and destroyers. The Phalanx CIWS, those rapid-firing Gatling guns for last-ditch defense. FA-18 Super Hornets scrambling to intercept. And sophisticated electronic warfare systems. But what if, despite all that, missiles reach their target? Here, the hope lies in watertight compartments. The entire ship is divided by reinforced, watertight bulkheads into hundreds of separate compartments. If one is breached and floods, the bulkheads are designed to isolate that compartment, preventing water from spreading throughout the ship and causing a catastrophic loss of buoyancy or stability. If a torpedo or missile hits and water rushes in, that section is automatically sealed. All passages into it are closed. The exact number of these compartments on the Gerald R is classified, but based on previous Nimitz-class carriers. We know there are hundreds, especially on the lower decks below the waterline, protecting engine rooms, fuel, ammunition, and provisions. Even the massive airplane hangars are compartmentalized, so that a single hit doesn't mean losing all aircraft at once. Now this is where it gets brutal. When that automatic pressurization system engages, it's an emergency. The highest priority is to save the ship, not necessarily every individual life. If people are trapped in a compartment that's been isolated due to flooding, no one will open it for them. They would be doomed. It's a horrific thought, but this cruel necessity is justified by the need to prevent the loss of the entire ship and the thousands of other lives on board. There are tragic historical examples. In 1960, on the submarine USS Sargo, An explosion in the oxygen system led to automatic isolation of the damaged compartment, and several crew members inside perished. In 2007, on the British nuclear submarine HMS Tireless, a ventilation system malfunction caused an explosion and fire. 2 sailors died when the automatic containment system cut them off from escape. Of course, even watertight compartments aren't a magic bullet. If the damage is too significant and multiple compartments are breached simultaneously, the ship can still lose stability. That's what happened to the Norwegian frigate KNM Helge Ingstead in 2018 after it collided with an oil tanker. It lost stability, capsized, and partially sank because critical compartments below the waterline were flooded. But let's circle back to our giant, the aircraft carrier. We hope such a fate never befalls us. And remember that incredible fact. Its average density is 7 to 8 times less than that of wood. For a tree that big to sink, it would have to be incredibly saturated with water. So while it might look like an upside-down pyramid defying gravity, the modern American aircraft carrier, like the USS Gerald R. is an astonishing feat of naval engineering. Designed with layer upon layer of ingenious solutions to stay afloat, stay stable, and survive overturning and destruction, short of a direct nuclear strike, and that, as they say, is another story, is something these ships are incredibly well equipped to resist. The sheer physics, the brilliant engineering, and the meticulous design that keep these colossal cities afloat, stable and safe, even when facing the fury of the ocean or the crucible of combat, are truly mind-boggling. It's a profound testament to human ingenuity and decades of learning. If this dive into the science of survival and the incredible marvels of naval architecture sparked your curiosity, or perhaps gave you a new appreciation for these floating giants, we'd be honored if you'd hit that like button, share this video with a fellow engineering enthusiast or anyone who loves a good "how does it work" story, and be sure to subscribe. We're all about connecting you to the fascinating stories and the incredible science behind the technology that shapes our world. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.